Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Footy Travellers Podcast.
Well, Mark, or shall we call you Mr. Ogden, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Obviously, it's very informal. Please call me Mark. I'm not that serious.
Isn't there Augie as well?
Yeah.
I feel like I heard that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I get all the nicknames. So whatever works, guys, but not Mr. Ogden. It makes me sound like my dad, and my dad's in his 70s.
Fair enough. Yeah, we may have heard a few nicknames on the ferry ride from Sydney Harbour to Sydney Olympic Park, where we met you for the World Cup final. But before all that came, you found yourself a football player yourself, and now you are a senior writer for ESPN in the UK. Tell us a little bit about your origin story. You know, how did you get into the work you're doing now? How did you get to this point?
Yeah, I mean, basically, you say I was a footballer. I think that's probably a bit of a stretch. I was a decent player as a kid into my teens, but I had an injury when I was about 14, 15. I did my knee ligaments, and then I think from that point on, it was fairly clear that I wasn't going to be able to carve out a career in the pro game. So, I was always good at English, always enjoyed English, came naturally to me, and then I just kind of fell into it. I mean, I went to college and I was given somebody pulled out of a work experience slot at my local paper. So I was asked if I wanted to do it, and I went along for a week, enjoyed it, got my first byline in the paper, which, as a kid, I was a young reporter, that's massive. And then from that point on, it all kind of fell into place because my dad was looking for a job at the time, and he found an advertisement for a trainee sports reporter. So I just finished this work experience gig, had a reference from the editor of the local paper. So I was so well prepared for this job that came out of nothing, and I applied for it, got the job. So I was 18 years old, so I didn't go to university. I just went from college into the job. But I was able to do that back in those days because the profession wasn't as weighted towards having a degree as it is now. And, obviously being an old timer, I think that's probably the best route to go into it, learning, working your way up from the bottom and doing the games on a really cold night in Barnsley or, these places that you don't really want to go to, and just getting to know people over the years. So I spent, I think, would it have been 7 years at the paper I started off at, a paper called The Weekly News, which was based in Manchester. Then I freelanced for maybe 7, 8, 9 years, at which I worked for a lot of the national papers as a freelance. And then I joined the Daily Telegraph on their staff as their Manchester reporter, covering United and City in 2009. So you think about 2009, it was Man United had just been to their second Champions League final in 2 years. Man City were 12 months into the Abu Dhabi ownership. Sir Alex Ferguson was still there. Cristiano Ronaldo just left United. So it was a massive time covering Manchester. It was a really, really busy time. And, even prior to that, I was covering Manchester. But at the point, it felt like the centre of the football universe. So I spent, I think, 5 or 6 years at the Telegraph. Had a year at the Independent as their chief football correspondent, which is like the number one job. And that meant, covering England, a lot of international games. And then basically I was at the Indy for 3 months, and they closed the paper, but they kept the online edition going. And I mean, that's still going now. It's still a healthy publication. It's still going strong. But at the time, it was quite unnerving. You're just 3 months into a new job and they closed the newspaper down. It was a little bit of a worrying time. And I had a friend who worked at ESPN who had got to know on a few Man United summer tours. And he said, look, if your situation's a bit precarious, we'd be really interested in speaking to you. I go to ESPN. So I spoke to ESPN, and it, took a few months to sort it out, but I moved there and I've loved every minute of it. It's been, probably the best decision of my career. It's a fantastic organisation to work for, and I just love the breadth of the job it allows me to do. It's not just a Premier League job; it's Champions League, Premier League, international stuff, as we know, as we met, on a ferry in Australia. It takes you all over the world. So, but it's also such a great organisation to work for. It's ESPN. It's globally known, so it opens a lot of doors, and it's great.
Yeah,
it's interesting, your timeline when it comes to the history of journalism, because I was a journalism major in college, wanting to do essentially what you do as a profession, and your path has coincided with the meteoric rise of the internet and how that has transformed journalism completely. And like you said, the Independent shut down the actual paper and just became a digital press. What would you say? How have you navigated that in terms of it being more of a online job, even though your responsibilities oftentimes are still being on site, being in traveling with it, but how has the internet and the availability or the demand for what you're producing has changed from maybe like when you first started as an 18-year-old?
It's changed beyond recognition, because obviously when I started, the internet wasn't even a thing. It just wasn't. And back in those days, I remember the office I worked in, because it was based in Manchester, but it had a kind of a national brief. So we had various different people at different desks who would basically get all of the local papers from all over the country mailed in every day, so that they would be able to scour those papers for stories they could follow up. So if there was a story in the northeast or in the southwest, they would read it in the local paper and then track it down that way. And that, obviously nowadays, it's so instantaneous. That story gets published online, and 30 seconds later you're seeing it in Manchester, and then you can chase it up, and you can get the story wrapped up in an hour. Whereas in the old way, it would take days, and also that back when there was no internet, that obviously it was a lot more of a less crowded environment in terms of covering the game. I would go to games until maybe the mid 2000s, where the only people there would be the print journalists, the newspaper journalists, because we hadn't had the proliferation of television stations, radio stations, online, YouTube accounts. So I remember the first time I went on a Man United pre-season tour was to South Africa in 2006. And I think there was 5 of us there, 5 reporters. Nowadays, I think on this year's summer tour, I'd imagine the last time I went on a tour like that, there was probably 20, 25 different media outlets there. So everybody now is able to cover the game because they have so many different outlets to do it. But in terms of online, everything's instantaneous. So there used to be deadlines. Used to be, for instance, you had to catch the first deadline for your first print edition. So it might be 7 o'clock in the evening. And people might think that's really early, but to get it off the press to make it to the paper, you had to get stuff filed by 7 p.m. So there was often times when I would go to a game, which was due to finish at 9:30, and I had to write my match report with the intro at 9 o'clock, which, there's half an hour of the game to play. But because print deadlines were such, and then obviously if something happened late on, which it always did, you had to ring in and they'd have to just tweak it. And obviously you'd never read the first editions because they were just a mess. Yeah, because you rushed it all out. One classic example of that, it may be an apocryphal story, but Sir Alex Ferguson used to tell the guys who were there at the Champions League final in 1999, he told them that he bought all the first editions the following day because obviously United won 2-1 with 2 goals in stoppage time. So he wanted to see what they'd actually written when they were trailing 1-0 for 85 minutes and how it reflected to the later editions. But that doesn't happen now because when you've got an online edition, online is there's no deadline. You just wait until the game starts, and so that's one element to it. But also, breaking news. If you had a breaking news line in 1999, you'd ring your newspaper office at mid-afternoon. They'd happily say, right, we'll sort that out. We'll get it on the paper and we'll put it away. And they'd hope that another paper would get wind of it. And then the next morning, you'd have this exclusive in a print edition. But now, if you're running a newspaper, you're thinking, well, if we've got this story at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we want to put it out at 3:30 in the afternoon. We put it online. So that's how it works. Everything's much more instantaneous. And, newspaper and print has taken a long time to adjust, and it's still adjusting really because, in the UK, we still have a situation where press conferences or press releases have an embargo on it. So you'll go to a press conference on a Friday, for instance, at midday, and the open section will be live. Everything's ready to go there and then, but there'll be a second bit which is embargoed until 10:30 p.m. that night or even the following night because of the print editions. I mean, I think that at some point will die out. Right. It seems like an anachronism there, but newspapers still want something fresh for their next morning edition. But the reality is, if you're reading that paper on a Saturday morning, you probably read it online at 10:35, 5 minutes after the embargo. So it's it's changed everything really.
The world moves faster than the print.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Thanks to the internet.
you have to embrace it. And, my job is, like I said, I just used to be a writer, and now I'm writing, podcasting, doing video news. I went to Qatar and I was doing a video blog from one of the fan camps, on TV. We have a TV station as well. So obviously you have to be able to do all elements of it, and it can be quite challenging, but I love the difference and I love the variety.
Well, speaking of the internet, just amplifying life and changing the pace for a lot of us, changing the dynamics of how we do our work. When you moved over to ESPN, now you're not just doing English football, you're doing things all over the world and traveling all over the world. I'm really curious to know, how many countries have you traveled to for the purposes of football? Do you have a little tally count going, or a little tracker you have? Or
I do actually. Sad little me has a little on my iPhone notes. So let me have a look.
So as you pull that up, I used to have one on my phone notes, and there's an app actually for it, because there's an app for everything.
Okay.
And it's called Countries Been, and it will give you all the list of them, and it can say where you've lived or where you've been. So this is not a commissioned insight to this app, but it does help me organize it a little bit more. But I'm interested. Let's hear it.
So New Zealand was the 54th country I've been to.
Okay.
To work on a football match. So I've actually been to Norway with work, but I didn't do a match. So Norway isn't on my list. So
Gotcha.
To be on the list, I have to have actually been to a game and reported on a game in that country. So it's 54. So I'm going to have to get to Norway at some point to scratch.
Norway will be the 55th.
Well, yeah maybe. Erling Haaland makes it a bit more newsworthy now. So there's every chance I'll get there at some point.
Yeah.
It obviously it gets harder to get new ones, because when you start, you're just ticking them off all the time. But when you're doing Champions League, it becomes fairly regular. You go to Italy, you go to Spain, you go to Germany, and there aren't really many offbeat countries in the Champions League, sadly. I got a lot of these ticked off when I was covering Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland international games. So you go to Georgia, to Albania, these places, which unfortunately don't really get on the Champions League map. So, of course, 25%.
Yeah, they're not part of the.
Yeah, so it's
not part of the circuit as much.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll talk about some of your more obscure Champions League trips in a minute, but
yes, I'm interested in, as you mentioned, kind of like Erling Haaland and the potential of maybe having to go to Norway. How much choice or say agency do you usually get in deciding your assignments?
So basically, I will pitch an idea to my editors, and it might involve a trip up the road to Liverpool, or it might involve a trip to Ukraine or to Poland. Last year I went to Poland to do a piece on Shakhtar Donetsk, who obviously couldn't go to Ukraine. So it depends where the story is. So, I don't look at the map thinking I need to go there. Can I find an idea? I mean, you have to have the idea has to lead the choice of where you go. But I went to Iceland in the summer to do, and this wasn't my idea, this was one of my editor's ideas, and he said, wouldn't it be great to do the first Champions League game of the season? And this was 2 weeks after the last Champions League season finished. So this was the UEFA Champions League preliminary round qualifier in Iceland, and it involved 4 teams from Iceland, San Marino, Andorra, and Montenegro. I'd never been to Iceland, so I was thinking, it's a great idea, but it also means I can tick another country off. So that was perfect for me. So but yeah, it depends on the idea. There has to be an idea to make it a valid trip. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a vanity trip, and there's you have to justify it by what you provide at the end of it.
I appreciated that. I will say, just because that article was really interesting, because it was really off the beaten path, and the storylines that come from it, and really just the way that you were able to interact with the players themselves, but also the fans, and like the way that they have to travel. I think it's a huge insight, because oftentimes when you're reading about the top clubs, you don't hear about really what happens off the pitch, right? And like how they get there, what they have to spend or what they have to go through to get there. And so I thought that article specifically was really fascinating, because these lesser known teams are fulfilling dreams playing in the Champions League, but they're also, having to take off time from their regular jobs and so forth. It's almost a more common man perspective.
Well, that was the fun of it as well, because you can get a little bit disillusioned. Maybe that's too strong a word, but when you're covering the Premier League and Champions League teams, it's access is so limited, and you feel like you're peering through the window at times as to what's going on. You don't really get an insight. But with this trip to Iceland, all the clubs were so welcoming and so happy that ESPN were there. It was almost like, somebody's actually taking notes. Somebody's actually interested, and the access was fantastic. The people were so friendly, and they all had, such great stories to tell. Like the San Marino captain who delayed his retirement at the age of 37 just so he could say, "I've played in the Champions League." And again, with the kid who scored for the team from San Marino, I've scored in the Champions League, and it's something that you can never take away from these guys. That he's a delivery driver in San Marino, but he scored in the Champions League. I mean, you can tell everybody that for the rest of your life. What a great story to tell! But you don't get those stories in the Champions League, sadly. It's a different game, really. But it's again a lot of people want to hear about. So you have to do both sides of it. You have to do get into the weeds of it, but also do the showbiz and the spotlight stuff.
Yeah,
and you probably don't get nearly as many media trained players, right? Like the answers that you're getting and the interviews that you're holding with these players are probably more genuine. I don't want to say more genuine, but they're probably more authentic and less filtered. Whereas a lot of these players that are playing, top level professional go through the training to know how to answer accurately and effectively.
Yeah. They're much just honest, and they'll tell you exactly what they feel, and that's much more authentic. And you feel for the modern day player at times. I think that generally the majority have got a personality and they've got something to say, but they are basically coached and basically warned not to say anything and don't express their personality. And I think that goes against them going forward. I think I always found that in terms of interviews or getting to know players, it's not really worth speaking to a player until he's like 30 years old, because at that point he's more confident within his own opinions and been around the game a lot longer, isn't scared of being told off by the manager or the chairman or the PR department. But when they're at 21, 22, they're so terrified of potentially putting their foot in it by saying the wrong thing that they don't say anything, and you end up getting robots.
Yeah.
So it's best to allow players to grow and mature a bit, and then you get good interviews then or good insight.
Yeah. I also loved reading that article. We'll definitely leave that a link to that in the show notes for our listeners to get a little window into what it's like. Yeah. Before the Champions League reaches the main stage and the glitz and the glamour of their theme song. I think one of the players mentioned he was really expecting that theme song to play before the match and was disappointed that he didn't get that opportunity to hear it play.
Can I just say that so the Iceland team, Breiðablik, that hosted this tournament, that they were just desperate to get past this round so that they could raise the coefficient level for the Icelandic teams. They've made it through to the Conference League group stages. They've gone through all these little, and it's like, it's fun. You feel like you kind of it's like having a child. It's done so well. They've taken the first steps and now they started school. They're in the Conference League group stage, and I guess to a Premier League or La Liga team, the Conference League is like a complete afterthought. But for Breiðablik to have a group stage in a European competition is massive, and it's one of the guys I spoke to, the captain, he has a bakery, and he said that that's his winter job. To October onwards, he has to focus on his bakery. Well, until December, they're going to be playing the Conference League, so he might have to put the bakery to one side. And what a brilliant story, the fact that they've made it all that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will admit, after reading that, I went through my FOTMob app and looked up the different teams and how far they advanced and saw that they're in now Group B, I think, with Ghent and Maccabi Tel Aviv. So awesome for them. That's a great story.
So cool.
Speaking of, Europa Conference Leagues and Champions Leagues and World Cups, those are obviously some of the bigger tournaments and events. Beyond the obvious, I'm curious, what are the differences between your typical, maybe short-term assignments and these month-long tournaments like World Cups where we met you? Obviously, the length of time is the obvious factor there. But when it comes to traveling, are there any major differences that you have to consider when you're going into these trips or while you're on them, or how you work?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is important, if you're doing a tournament for 3 to 4 weeks, I think it's the most vital element is to make sure that you're in a good hotel, because where you stay just dictates everything. Your mood, being able to eat properly, being handy for metro stations. I've been in places that have been out of town and hard to get to places, and it makes life so much more difficult. So being in the right place is absolutely vital, because it just makes things so much easier. But you have to factor in lots of things. Qatar was unusual in the sense that you didn't really have to do any traveling. It was just all very centralized. If we go back to Russia in 2018, I didn't really have a base, and so then you have to think, well, you're moving around, so you've got your luggage to carry around everywhere. And that's difficult. You're dragging it around, for 5 or 6 different cities, but you have to make sure that you can get, because in Russia as well, it's sometimes hard to get direct flights between venues, so you'd find yourself, going from the amount of times I went through Sheremetyevo Airport just connecting to God knows where,
Yeah.
And, so those little things matter. And one memory I've got of Russia, and I did love Russia as a tournament, as a country. I thought it was an amazing World Cup, is the Aeroflot sandwich. It was every flight I went on, it was the same sandwich. No matter what time of day it was, what the destination was, it was the same little bread roll with a piece of gristly ham and cream cheese. And, it was just
cream cheese.
Memory of Russia, the Aeroflot sandwich.
Consistency. They were consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a lot of thought going into it, but yeah. So, these are the things. Listen, and if you're able to choose where you go, that's even better. Now, there's mates of mine in the business who still take the piss out of me for 2010 back in South Africa. I had a month in Cape Town, and
nice.
I was lucky in the sense that I wasn't doing England at the time. England were based in Sun City, which was a horrible place, basically. This theme park, Jurassic Park style place, in just out of Johannesburg. So they had a month in Sun City. And I was in Cape Town for a month, and it was like, how did you manage to get into Cape Town for a month? Well, I was fortunate. And I was at the Telegraph at the time, and they hired it was like an apartment, which was, it was a nice apartment, but it did have a view of Table Mountain. It's just like, how lucky can you get? You're working in a beautiful place like Cape Town at a World Cup. That really is like the pinnacle of, you couldn't get any better than that. So if you can get a place like that where the city's great, the food's great, the connections are great, you are lucky. But I did, we've had some horror stories in the sense that, being in, was it Samara in Russia? I think it was 41 degrees Celsius, or whatever that is in Fahrenheit. I'm not sure, maybe over 100. And the curtains,
over 100, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, easily.
The curtains were wafer thin, so it didn't really get dark in the room. It was so hot, and the plants were kind of dying on the lobby, and the bath was probably the size of a sink. So listen, it's a great job, but it's not all glamour.
Yeah. It was that hot in Moscow, I want to say.
Yeah.
It was pretty rough.
Yeah.
I was surprised how warm it was in Moscow. Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty warm. But okay, so I mean, I can only imagine that there's been some rough times, and we've all, we travel a lot, so we've had some rough times as well. But what were some of your favorite things that you did as maybe like a traveler or a tourist while you were in Australia and New Zealand, where we met you?
Yeah, so I was there for 2.5 weeks. So one thing that I stumbled upon while I was there, and it was, again, it wasn't planned, but it was very fortunate. So I'd been to Reykjavik in June, July, which is the northernmost capital city in the world. So I find myself in New Zealand, and Wellington is the southernmost capital in the world. So I thought, well, it'd be great to get to Wellington. And we had a change in our match schedule, which meant that I had to go to Wellington for Spain against the Netherlands. So I was able to, tick off this very kind of unique, I won't say achievement, but, being in the northernmost and southernmost capitals in the space of a month was quite something else. So I enjoyed that. And then because I was in New Zealand, I thought, well, it's supposed to be such an iconic place. I got the train back from Wellington to Auckland, which is called the Northern Explorer. And it's supposedly one of the great train rides of the world. And it's New Zealand. It was spectacular. It was 11 hours. So it was quite uncomfortable at times. It wasn't a luxury train. It was a train with a cattle truck at the back, so you could stand and get a glimpse of the mountains when you went through. But, we saw mountains, we saw, viaducts, gorges, amazing coastline. So that was a real privilege because, New Zealand is so far away that even if you chose to go to it, would take, a lot of time and money to plan it. So that was fantastic. And
It's a haul.
yeah, but I had a spare few hours on the day of the final, so I went to Bondi Beach, and there's this great walk between Bondi and Coogee Beach. It's about a 6-kilometer walk, and on that walk, there's probably 5 or 6 different beaches. Some are really busy, some are deserted, and that was just a beautiful way to see it. And the weather was fantastic, and it was just just being in Sydney, you're basically in Sydney Harbour. You've got to your right, you've got the Opera House, and to your left, you've got the bridge. 2 of the most iconic buildings in the world, within vision. So Australia's a place it's almost like built for a postcard, isn't it? And I felt that at times I was in the harbour, and certainly at night time, it felt like Sydney was showing off. That it was so well lit, the bridge was so well lit, and the Opera House, that it really was a kind of one of those wow moments. So yeah, that you don't get a lot of time to explore. So when you do get the chance, you have to take it, because you often find that rather than exploring, you're just traveling. So when the first week I was there, I arrived on the Saturday night. On the Sunday lunchtime, I went to a game in Sydney. Sunday evening, flew to Brisbane. Monday evening, had a game in Brisbane. Tuesday morning, flew to Adelaide. Game in Adelaide Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, flew to Auckland. And then Friday, flew to Wellington. So rather than have the time to...
On the move.
Yeah, exactly. So, which is, that is the job. You are there primarily to work, and that's the key. You're not there as a tourist, but when you do get the opportunity to take it, you have to, because you never know when you're going to be back there, if you ever are.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you might only be in Sydney once, Mike.
Yeah.
You actually validated my decision. I feel like I kind of insisted that we stayed in Bondi Beach while we were in Sydney, to give us kind of that coastal vibe and that more relaxed atmosphere at the end of what was kind of a whirlwind month. And we did the Bondi to Coogee walk too. And so there's a little personal pat on the back I'm going to just give myself for making sure we got there and brought Mike to see that area of the city. But sorry, I think I cut you off, Mike.
No, I was going to say that our last episode, we talked about that coastal walk you specifically did as well. And it was one of, I think, our favorite things to do. And one of the things you probably should do when you're in Sydney, because, it's such a unique city that you have that downtown CBD area, but then you can just go right to the beaches and walk along it and not feel like you're in a major metropolis.
Absolutely.
But your traveling schedule that you just sort of laid out kind of lends nicely to this question, which is, I believe that you're about to take off to San Marino, I think soon. So can you tell us what you'll be doing there, and any interesting things, or is it going to just be like a on the job in and out for on to the next place?
It's interesting in the sense that it's a very difficult place to get to, considering it's mainland Europe. So obviously it's a micro state within Italy. I think the population is about 30,000. So I have to fly Manchester to Bologna, get a train from Bologna to Rimini, and then from Rimini you have to get a cab to San Marino. There's no train station in San Marino, no airport, no train station. So it's difficult to get to. It's been made more difficult by the fact that my Vienna to Bologna leg has been cancelled by my airline. So that was yesterday, so I've had to kind of rebook. So I've now got a day in Vienna tomorrow. Which, Vienna, beautiful city. So basically I've got a day in Vienna to wait until I fly to Bologna. So that's the upside and the downside, because the upside is you get to see a beautiful European city, but the downside is that you don't really need to be there. So you want to be somewhere else. But the idea of San Marino is they are the worst team in the world. They haven't won a game since 2004. And they are bottom of the FIFA rankings. So the idea is that we go and watch what's it like to be San Marino, what's it like to play against San Marino, what's it like to be a fan of San Marino. So that's the idea behind the piece. So it's a different one, and it's that will be number 55, I think, in terms of new countries. So I've never been to San Marino.
Yeah. Okay.
But again,
Norway, you'll have to wait to get on the list.
Yeah, but again, I think that the idea makes it stack up. It makes it work. It's not just it's a good story. It's a good. It's a lot of pathos. This story about playing for San Marino and watching. So that's the idea. And who knows? They might win.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
you might be the lucky
and
charm.
you'd be there.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're, as we talk about, people that travel for football, one of the big areas that we like to talk about is the actual logistics And your description of your leg being canceled by your airline is a lot of things that people talk about in terms of what makes or breaks a trip, right? Like if the hotel stinks, then you oftentimes don't find the city that you're in is very enjoyable. Or if you're not feeling well, so many factors at play. How do you navigate the varying changes of like the travel industry? And like, are you doing all of your own booking, or, are you doing points, or do you have like an allegiance to a certain airline, or anything, hotels?
No, I do. I do my own travel because I just why delegate something so important to somebody else? Because it really matters. What time I'm going to be there. You can't blame anybody else if it goes wrong, basically. And I do prefer to know where I'm going, when I'm going, choose when I'm going, because you guys will know the more you travel, the more you realise there may be shortcuts, or there are kind of things you don't want to do. There's certain airports you don't want to go through. Frankfurt being one. Frankfurt is an amazing airport, but it's so big that if you have a connection that's less than 90 minutes, you might miss your flight. So you try to avoid certain airports. I try to avoid Ryanair, but I'm flying Ryanair tomorrow, and they're the one that cancelled my other flight. But that isn't their fault this time because it was an Italian baggage handler strike. Right. So you try and go with reliable airlines. You try and get direct flights, try and avoid connections. Things that obviously connect. I mean, I remember once I was on the way to a Man City game in Italy, in Rome, and we missed our connection in Zurich, and we had 11 hours at Zurich just waiting for the next flight. So it's just try to minimise the possibility of something messing up, So you can never predict things, but like cancellations or delays or bad weather. So I just try and make sure that I like I said, minimise the connections and avoid certain airports, and try to go with airlines that don't charge you just to actually breathe. You know what I mean? That you
right.
When you pay for the ticket, you're getting a seat, you're getting a bag, and you might even be looking to get something to eat. So little things like that, because when you're traveling, you tend not to eat as well as you should do. So, you
absolutely, yeah.
You find you go all day without eating, or just drinking coffee, or eating the Aeroflot sandwich. So,
with cream cheese.
Yeah, and in terms of hotels, I always want to stay near a metro station if I can, because one thing I find is, whether it's just me, I don't know, but when you get to a new city, just to get on the metro, and that way you can just get your work out how to get around the city so much easier. So a lot of stadiums in Europe, you can get on the metro line. So why waste your time or your money in a cab being stuck in traffic? Get on the metro. You move quicker, and it's cheaper, So all those little things, and then once you've got your bearings, it's a lot easier to get around.
Yeah.
And you get to interact with people too. I think that's one of our favorite parts about going to the metro lines, is being able to actually engage with the locals or others that are headed to the match, similarly to how we met you, was en route to the final, even though that was a very unique transportation and it wasn't necessarily the metro.
I've got some more unique
or
ones.
Unless you're going to San Marino.
Yeah. I've got some more unique modes of transport. I think that question is coming later on, but I'll save that. But it was a great way to get to a World Cup final on a boat underneath some Sydney harbour. So fairly unique.
Right? I loved it. Well, speaking of unique things, what's the most obscure place football has taken you in your life? Is it San Marino? Is it somewhere else?
Good question. Kazakhstan was quite obscure. Obviously Kazakhstan is in Central Asia, but it's part of UEFA. So their teams are in the European competition. So back, what would it have been? I think it was 2019, just before COVID. I went to Kazakhstan with Man United because I had the piece that I was thinking of was, the idea they were playing FC Astana, which was the city had been renamed before we went there. So it wasn't Astana anymore. It was Nur Sultan. It had been named after the president. So it's like Washington being called Donald. It's one of those strange. So we went to Nur Sultan.
He might have tried.
It may happen, unfortunately. Yeah. But, so the idea was that Man United had obviously been the biggest, the best, the most formidable football team in the world under Sir Alex Ferguson. But 6 years after he retired, they were out of the Champions League. They were nowhere near qualifying for it next season. They were nowhere near winning the Premier League, and they were playing in Kazakhstan on a Thursday night. And I'm thinking, that is as low as it gets. For Man United when Man City and Liverpool are playing Champions League, they're playing in Munich and Turin. Man United, Kazakhstan on a Thursday night. So I went to Kazakhstan to do that piece, to do this. This is as low as it gets, and We landed in snow, and it snowed, and the snow was just there for 3 days. It was so cold. I looked at my my weather app on the phone, and again, so you have to translate this into Fahrenheit. It was minus 27 degrees Celsius.
Wow!
Oh my god!
And you could feel your face sting. But obviously the stadium was a covered stadium, so that when you're in the game and it's almost like air conditioned with heating, so that was fine. But it was just white for 3 days, and it was just a fascinating, unusual place. It was just obviously what the sense you got was that it was a country that had lots and lots of oil wealth. There was these fantastic buildings going up, and there was talk of an Olympic bid going in, but all the roads were straight. There were just these lengthy, long boulevards, straight roads from the airports everywhere. But it was quite an obscure place, and the language barrier was really noticeable. And it was just it was basically, it was not far from the Chinese border, so that's how far away it was. And it was a European fixture, but it just felt like Manchester United's lowest point since Sir Alex Ferguson left. That they're having to play in this competition they don't want to be in on a Thursday night in a place where they would never, ever have dreamt of being. So, Kazakhstan probably ticks that box.
Okay. I just looked it up. It's roughly negative 16 degrees, by the way. Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit.
So
jeez.
It's a good 40, 50 some degrees off of the freezing point on the Fahrenheit scale. Cold weather, freezing temperatures, travel logistics going awry. I know when those things happen for Mike and I, we have each other. We can kind of lead on each other and find what is it? What do they say? Misery loves company. Find support in one another as we move along. Are there any, speaking of friends and support, are there any good travel buddies you have? Is there anyone you particularly like working with or traveling with, or is there anyone that our listeners should keep an eye on for their reporting as well?
Yeah. So when I was obviously doing United and City as a pack reporter, you would travel as part of the pack. There were 7-8 of you. The same faces would do all the same trips, so you kind of form quite a bond with the guys. You have a rivalry, but you're all friends. You go for a meal together, go for a drink together. But since I've taken on this role at the Indian and ESPN, you do find yourself traveling on your own quite a lot, because that's just the nature of the job, that you are a bit of a sole traveler, because the job is you don't go in a pack to do this kind of story. So. There's a guy from Ian Herbert at the Daily Mail. Used to work with him at the Indy. He does similar things to me. So there's been a couple of occasions where we've been on the same trips together. Ian's just done a great book about Wrexham, by the way. He's a Wrexham fan, and he's done a book called Tinseltown about the story of the whole Ryan Reynolds, Rob McElhenney thing. So I'll give that a plug for him, because he spent a lot of time in that, and I think he name checks me in there as well. So that's why he's getting a plug.
There you go.
So we went to Russia for the Confederations Cup in 2017. That was quite a good one. Went to Qatar about this time last year just to get an idea of what it was going to be like. We were in Qatar. This is one of those weird things that we were in Qatar when Queen Elizabeth died. Now, neither myself or Ian was to be, monarchist or royalist, but obviously she was a huge figure. And at the time it was being announced that she died, we were on a kind of a visit to what was best described as the WAG Island, the Wives and Girlfriend Island, that the Qataris thought that the wives and girlfriends were going to stay during the World Cup, and it was called Banana Island. So we're actually on Banana Island as the Queen dies, and it just felt, what a strange thing to tell your grandkids that, where were you and the Queen? Yes, I was on Banana Island.
Where were you?
Yeah. So and Ian and I were also in Austria a year ago when I went to a piece on Iran. Iran were playing Uruguay in a place called St. Pölten in Austria. Again, a very random game, but the idea at the time was that Iran were in England's group and the US group. So from an ESPN point of view, they were a big team because they're playing the US and also England. So the whole idea was to go and watch Iran play, see what they're like. But it turned out to be a completely different story, in the sense that 2 weeks prior to that, the Mahsa Amini situation erupted and protests started to be sparked in Iran. And to the point where we applied to go to the game, and the Iranians rejected it. Not the Iranian FA, which is run by the Islamic government, refused our. So we got basically banned from the game by the government of Iran. Now, which made it a better story, in the sense that if we had been banned from a game, a fantastic story. But we knew Carlos Queiroz, the Iranian coach, because he used to be the coach at Man United. And Carlos is a very urbane guy. He's Portuguese, speaks several different languages, very at ease with himself. And we went to the team hotel, and there were lots of coaches, suspicious kind of figures in Iranian suits and training gear. And you could tell it. I felt quite sorry for them in the sense that they were quite worried that we were there. They didn't want to be seen to be talking to us because somebody might have seen them talking to us, and who knows what the ramifications would have been. But Carlos came over, big smile on his face, and we told him the situation. It's fine, guys. We'll make sure you get in. And he gave a press conference that it wasn't supposed to happen. He started speaking off the cuff, but that gave a real insight into. And I know I've gone off the topic here, but just an insight into what happened. It made it a fantastic story of what was happening back in Iran and how it seeps into football, because there were protests at the game as well. That people were thrown out for waving Iranian flags. But how sometimes you don't really realise that the people who are making life difficult for you, why are they doing that? Well, because they might be frightened as well. These Iranian officials that were being obstructive, I got the sense they weren't doing it out of malice. It was because if they were being helpful, the other guy that was wearing an Iranian suit might have been not very helpful and might have been reporting back on what he did to people that might have made life difficult for him. So that's what you have to bear in mind sometimes. That everyone hasn't got an agenda against you. It could be because they're very fearful of the outcome and the ramifications. So, but that was an interesting trip because it gives a real insight into Iran and the story there. And obviously it carried on to the World Cup, didn't it, with the Iranian situation. So that was one that I was kind of proud of, in the sense that it kind of flagged up an issue that was going to happen at the World Cup.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because I often say everyone has a boss and everyone has orders, essentially, in some way, shape, or form. And it kind of leads to this sort of pivot question that I have, which is, how often does your story idea change dramatically? You go in with an idea, right? You go to Kazakhstan to cover Man United as its lowest low, for instance. But maybe something occurs, or some vision, the people you meet or the behaviors of the individuals that you're working with kind of pivot your perspective, and you're like, I might need to change this story. Does that happen often? I mean, obviously you have to pivot in some regard, but how many times do you veer away almost completely from what your main your objective was?
Yeah, it does happen quite a lot, and I like it that way. I do like to go in there with an idea, but with the ability to kind of turn it around, do a 180, because things change, and the Iran story is a case in point. I mean, there's another one that's, again, it's a bit similar to the San Marino story. It's much more localised. There was a team in England about 18 months ago called Dover Athletic, and they were in the National League, which is the 5th tier, and they started the season with a 10-point deduction for, I forget what I think it was, not paying players or something. There was an issue the season before, so they started the season on minus 10 points, and anyway, this was January, and they hadn't won a game, and they were basically drawn a couple, but they were on minus points. So I thought it would be a great story to go. It was a year since they won their last game, so I went to the game. I thought I'd do a story on this team that could end up the season with minus points, lost virtually every game they played. Anyway, they won the game. They won the game on the anniversary of the last win. They won the game. So my idea of doing this kind of story of misery became the story of joy. That they
hope,
but things that you didn't expect. So they won the game. Also, one of the players was, I found out, was Lionel Messi's body double for Pepsi and things. So whenever Messi does a TV commercial, this guy who's playing non-league football in England was Messi's body double. And then there was a guy in gold who was a TikTok influencer with 2 million followers on TikTok because he's a famous model, which again, so these little gems and little stories come out when you least expect them. And that's what the best part of the job. And I think that's why, people talk about AI taking over journalism. I think you're not going to get a computer getting those stories, and that's the fun of it. So you have to always kind of go there with a basic outline, but it's often better when it changes, because if it changes, the story's better. So, for instance, San Marino this weekend, I think the idea is to do this feature, maybe let it, do a bit of work on it and do this piece maybe in a week or two's time. But if they win on Sunday, then I'm writing straight away, because it's 19 years since the last one, so that becomes a great story, different to what you expect. So, but I do like that kind of adrenaline rush that comes with having to change everything you've planned and just go off, flying by the seat of your pants.
Yeah. We're
That's
gonna
awesome.
we're gonna keep an eye on that San Marino game and see what story comes out of that, and we'll probably have a nice little another link for our show notes by the time this episode comes out. So that's fun. Speaking of preparing for trips and whatnot for jobs and stories, I kind of have a couple nerdy questions I'm just really curious about to ask you. When it comes to packing, how much time do you get to typically pack? It sounds like you have some leeway and some advanced notice of your trips. Are you ever getting sent on like these quick, sudden trips where you have to pack real quickly, or I don't know?
Nothing like the click of fingers. I do have a good idea when I'd be going, but to be honest, the longer I have, the worse it is because I end up taking way too much. So,
that's like me.
Yeah, if I can do a trip which involves just having my backpack with my laptop, a couple of days clothes, and toiletries, that's great. That's what I want, because I don't want to be risking having my bicycle missing or waiting at the baggage carousel. I just want to get off the plane, get on again, and I don't want to check in. I want to just go through the security. So the less time I've got to prepare, the better. So I've not started packing for San Marino yet, and I'm going tomorrow morning. So that's probably a good thing. But
yeah, right.
No, I just travel as light as possible because it just less things to carry. But the Women's World Cup was difficult because I had to connect through Hong Kong. I had an overnight in Hong Kong. So you had Hong Kong, which is plus 30 degrees. Then you got Australia and New Zealand in the winter. So for New Zealand, I had to take my kind of winter coat, which probably took up half my case. If I didn't take that coat, I could have travelled, with a carry-on, a trolley bag. But the coat meant I had to pack in checked luggage, and that kind of annoyed me for 3 weeks that I was having to lug this big suitcase around. So just travel as light as possible. Yeah. But, there have been times I've been caught out when I've been just way too cold at games for taking the wrong coat, and that, coats are the issue.
A nice layer system. Yeah, definitely. I think helps as the weather changes.
Absolutely.
So as a sports journalist, you are, and you've talked about this in a lot of your pieces, you are interacting with fans very frequently. And so getting that fan perspective is really key and something that I think makes your writing really unique. And so the Footy Travelers motto is actually be loud, be proud, and be good to each other. And so these questions are asking for some superlatives out of you. So the first being, which fan base do you think is the loudest?
Ooh, in terms of when they kind of confront you and when they see you, or just generally at a game?
I would say I'm thinking maybe more so like the fan base at a match. The loudest, the most
expressing,
rambunctious, expressive. Yeah. Maybe not as like in interactions with you, but more like as a whole.
Well, I mean, I find that the Newcastle crowd is always quite noisy, especially since the takeover. Prior to that, it became a very kind of downbeat and a miserable club because of the ownership, and it was quite sad. But it's found its voice again. St James's Park is a real cauldron of noise, and the Champions League nights will be something different. But it is a cliche, but Anfield is spectacular, especially the Champions League night. It's just different. It changes. It's always an atmospheric ground, but it's just. You can sense the ghosts of the past, that the fans are there because their fathers and grandfathers told them stories of the 70s and 80s, and they're passing it down. And that is what I see at Anfield and feel at Anfield, which I don't see at Man City or I don't see at Chelsea. You see it at Man United a little bit, but just this, they protect the history and the legacy of the past, and it's a brilliant thing. And I do think that gives Liverpool an edge, that the memories of the great teams of the 70s and 80s and the Istanbul team of 2005, it does get passed down for generations. And you see that with Liverpool. You see that when you see the travelling fans, you see the different generations. You do see the granddad and the dad and the son, and you can see how it will be passed on. And in terms of noise, San Siro last season when Milan played Napoli, so loud. The San Siro, I don't know if you've been to San Siro, but anyone that's listening that's not been and wants to go, it is not going to be there for much longer. It's going to get knocked down. Just go, because it's an amazing football ground. And the day they played Napoli, the front page of the local paper, it had a picture of the San Siro with the headline "La Scala del Calcio," which I thought was brilliant. It really is like the kind of the opera of the theatre of football. It's just an amazing venue.
Yeah, you would know more than anyone else, Mark. The project to demolish the San Siro, that got delayed a little bit, but it's still happening. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, the two clubs are trying to locate a new stadium, and they want to stay there. But I think because the government, the local government has got involved, and because it's such a historic building, they want to maintain it in some way, to the point where it might not be able to be used as a stadium. And I think Milan have got some major event coming in the next few years. It's not whether it's not an Olympics, but they've got something coming that they want to retain it for. So I don't know how it's going to work. I just wish they could find a way to modernise it, but I think it is beyond modernising. But it's just an incredible stadium.
Okay.
That is definitely on our bucket list. And when we heard that it was slightly delayed, we were already looking at flights and ways to get there somehow. Okay, so going back to that three-part question. So your distinction of loudest could be a little bit blended with proudest, because you talked about Liverpool's history and a lot of that. But maybe we changed proudest to being kind of most herald or historic, or maybe the most fervent.
Well,
do you think there's a difference
there?
Yeah,
I mean, pride and fervent. I think the Burnley supporters, which might surprise you, Burnley's a real kind a real kind of surprise, in the sense that you look at the Premier League now, it's mainly clubs from big cities, and you have to be a big city to sustain a Premier League team for so many different reasons. But Burnley have really kind of punched above their weight for so many years now. And I think the population of Burnley is about 70, 80,000. It's a small town, but everybody in Burnley supports Burnley. So you can go anywhere in the UK, you can see Liverpool shirts, Man United shirts. You go to Burnley, you see Burnley shirts. And it's a real badge of honour for the people in the town that you basically grow up claret and blue. And that is how it is there. It's a unique town in the sense that the pride they have in supporting their team. They have a big away following. Again, much bigger than you would think from a town of their size. And it's just a real throwback. And they were quite a successful team in the 60s. They won the league title back in 1960 or 61, I think it was. And they had a reputation back in the day for basically unearthing lots of homegrown players, punching against the weight against the big teams. And then they fell on hard times in like the 19...
Kind of like the Brighton.
Yeah. And they fell on hard times in the 80s. And they were with one game of being relegated out of the league completely to the non-league back in the 80s. And they've slowly come back. And again, I think they're an example to clubs of that size how to do it, to use your resources well, find players on low budgets, but they are backed by a very passionate, proud support base.
Nice.
I love that answer. And so the last question, as our motto goes, be good to each other. What fan base do you think does the most good, or maybe is is kind-hearted, or maybe looks after each other the most?
It's a good question.
The Boca Ultras.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this applies to a lot of fans, but I think I'm going to go for Everton fans, because I did a story a couple of years ago about that Everton fans set up food banks for local, because obviously, I guess all over the world, people are finding it difficult in economic times, and Liverpool is particularly struggling in terms of poverty and that sort of thing. And Everton is one of the poorest neighbourhoods of a poor city. So the Everton fans set up food banks, and they said that, hunger doesn't have colours, and that's the motto, that, no matter what colour. But it became a thing. It's just local fans with a kind of little van, and every game they would take donations and hand out the food at games. But they then started a collaboration with Liverpool fans. So Liverpool and Everton fans now work together and have food banks, for each other. So you saw Anfield, there'll be Everton fans on a Liverpool match day collecting and handing out food bank, and vice versa. And this group, I really should find it. I've forgotten the name, but I'll pass it on to you and I'll remember it. But it's now, when they got to Man City, when they got to Newcastle, they're also helping collect. So they've started this movement where football fans are collecting food and distributing food to people who are struggling. And I think the point I did when I spoke to them was that, football is a very wealthy sport, but the football doesn't really do enough. So it shouldn't be up to fans to do this. But yeah, the Everton fans have got, a big heart in that sense.
That's amazing. And that must be even more of a reason to really hope that Everton can stay up, and because right now, in the last few years, it's been a struggle, but that rivalry in itself is historic. And then that collaboration that you're talking about is also, seeming to do really good things for not only Liverpool, but the whole country.
Absolutely.
That's really amazing.
Yeah, good on them. Roger Bennett will be happy to hear that Everton got some shout outs here on our podcast.
Right.
Well, Mark, it's been really awesome talking to you, hearing your stories about traveling and footy reporting. Again, meeting you on that ferry in Sydney was a joy, and to have you back with us to have this chat is an honor and a pleasure. Before we send you off, though, we're going to do a little thing we like to do with some of our guests, a la a rapid fire round. So we'll ask you some little quick hit questions, and first thing that comes to mind, don't be shy. We'll have some good fun with it. We'll see what jumps to mind quickly, and some of these might be pretty obvious. Some of them might be a little obscure themselves, but we'll have a go.
We like to pretend and put it on the clock and say 90 seconds.
We won't.
But we just do it. It's
We're
more of
past
just
that.
an act.
Yeah. We've never successfully done that. So, but if you're ready, I'm ready. Mike, are you ready?
I'm ready.
We have our list. All right. So first question, what's your must-have travel accessory or gadget?
Headphones.
Yeah. Touche.
Over ear or buds?
Over
Good
ear.
follow-up.
Over ear.
Ooh, okay. Aisle or window?
A window every time.
Reporter or TV personality?
Reporter. Some people said I have a personality.
What's your
Well, let's not forget that we met your former intern on that ferry ride, and he didn't like that you were recognized because of your TV personality.
My former intern, we have to name check it. It's Rory Smith of the New York Times.
There we go. We got you, Rory.
Thanks for taking that photo for us, Rory.
Favorite airline?
Emirates.
Any particular reason why?
Well, they have regular flights. The airline's great. The food's great. It's a very kind of comfortable airline, and you can rely on them. That you can tell that they're backed by a wealthy oil state because everything seems brand new.
Fair enough.
And you can get anywhere in the world with it. Emirates take you anywhere you want to go in the world.
Right.
Obviously via Dubai, but they are very well connected.
Wow, that was a good tagline. We may have to send that over to Emirates and get you some free flights. Best airport?
Best airport. Wow, that is a tough one. Singapore's pretty amazing. Incheon in Seoul, I've been there for a long time. Yeah. But yeah, definitely, I think Singapore is very much a futuristic airport that is like a bit of a wow place. Can I give my worst airport just as part of the additional part of it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, do that.
Manchester Airport. My local airport is horrible. Absolutely awful. Sorry, guys, it's the worst.
We'll have to take that for what it's worth from a local too. Maybe this answer is obvious, but favorite Premier League team?
You see, that's a difficult question. I'm not being evasive, but you're asking who I grew up supporting or who I enjoyed dealing with the most. So my favourite team that I enjoyed dealing with the most would be, let me think, I think Burnley are a good team to deal with.
Okay. Burnley getting a shot.
And I'm assuming that they were not the team that you were supporting when you were younger.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Favorite club team overall, globally?
Well, I used to love watching Man United when they were good. Nowadays, it's not so good, So I do, and this was like a real contradiction. But I think Liverpool as well. The fact that United and Liverpool are such big rivals, but I like the way that Liverpool retain a touch of their tradition in the past going forward. I think that I like big clubs. I like big clubs that have got a proud history and acknowledge that history, and I think Liverpool do it really well. And I think that Liverpool have got a very grown-up attitude to things as well. We've had their issues with the Super League and everything. I take that, but I think Liverpool are a club that strike that balance better than most in terms of the past and the future.
Okay. Feel free to take the fifth if this affects your standing as a unbiased journalist, but Messi or Ronaldo?
Ronaldo.
Oh.
Because, look, I spent a lot of my time as a reporter covering Ronaldo in Manchester, and I saw him go from being this infuriating kid to this superstar. but he was also quite helpful as to journalists back in the day. I remember. Is that noise in the background beginning to irritate? By the way, or can you hear it?
We hear it,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's all good. It's part
close,
of it.
I'll close the window because it's irritating me. Hang on.
Gotcha. Fair enough.
So sorry, I'll start again. So
if you start to drip sweat, just feel free to open it again.
So Ronaldo was, I saw his career develop and rise to when he became the superstar at Old Trafford. But there was a time when at the World Cup in 2010, a few of us who covered Manchester at the time watched the Portugal game. I think they're playing Ivory Coast in South Africa, and
we were at that match.
Yeah, it was very cold. That's what I remember, having to buy hats that day.
Yeah.
Ronaldo came into the post-match press conference and he had this FIFA media guy was basically saying, no more questions. And Ronaldo recognised the viewers from Manchester. And he said, no, these guys have come from Manchester. Let me ask them questions. So he actually, gave us the time. And I don't really ever see Messi doing that, So Ronaldo, from a purely personal perspective in how his career was kind of coincided with mine. Obviously, he's had much success than I have, but I've seen his career through the years, and he's been helpful to us. So I think Ronaldo is obviously sometimes misunderstood, and I've seen both sides of Ronaldo. But if a footballer of that status is prepared to say to a media guy, no, let these guys have a question, then that wins every time for me.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's a great perspective. That's a good story.
And I mean, who knows? Maybe the Saudi league will call you up, and you get that blow up like he did. So that's fine. Okay, back. Another question: favorite MLS team?
I won't say I really have one, but I've been over there a few times over the years, and I've been to a few games and I've been to a few stadiums. So I did a little bit with work with LAFC before they started out. So I suppose I do keep an eye on what they're doing, but I'd imagine LAFC aren't particularly popular in the US because they're big and they're brash and they've got a lot of money behind them. So, I'd imagine it'll be an LA team or a New York team, but let's say LAFC.
Okay. What's been your worst footy travel experience in 10 words or less? Michael, count.
I got 10 words.
Being ill at the World Cup in Brazil.
There you go.
Yeah, 9 words. There you go. I'm sorry to hear that.
Couldn't have been great.
It came back really ill. Well, basically, I had to go to the Tropical Diseases Centre near me 3 times because they could never find out what it was. But it was, I think, with a tournament, everybody gets a cough because of the air conditioning and the media rooms. Everybody's overworked. No, you lose sleep because you're getting early flights and you're finishing late. You're not eating properly. So everybody's ill at a tournament. It just happens, and it's. I also got ill in Qatar.
We've been there.
So it's just.
We talked about that. Yeah, the Qatar.
It's just
well.
it's just the price and the ticket really that you just work yourself too hard, don't eat well enough, sleep in air conditioned rooms and get ill. So I guess that's what it was. But I've been to Manaus, the venue in the Amazon. It was. And I didn't feel right after that. It was so hot and so uncomfortable that really knocked me for 6. So I think that was why I came back under the weather, shall we say.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the best tip for combating jet lag?
Fly business class if you can.
That's a great
Which
tip.
is difficult, yeah. But that's what I'd say. And if anybody out there wants to help me prove that theory, just give me business class and I'll tell you if it works.
Yeah.
Right. I'll be the guinea pig.
It's very brave of you, Mark. Very brave. Which footy destination is still on your bucket list?
Well, I'm not going to say Norway because that's just a bit of a strange.
Yeah,
So I think it has to be Boca Juniors v River Plate at La Bombonera. And I guess this is what is top of everyone's bucket list. But I haven't done enough South America. And I would just love to go to that game, Boca versus River.
Well, we kept getting, we're continually told or suggested that we need to get down to South America, get down to Buenos Aires and do Boca as well. So maybe there's a little Footy Travelers, Mark Ogden Boca trip in the future. We'll see.
That'd be great.
We'll try to find the story for you and then make the reason for you to be able to get down there.
That would be good.
In your professional opinion, where does soccer in America find itself in the next 5 years?
Well, I think '94 was when the US kind of woke up to the game, the '94 World Cup. And I think from that point on, it's grown. The league's grown. The talent pool has developed. And I think the talent pool has kind of gone a bit stagnant recently. But I think 2026 could be a real kind of trigger point to take it to a different level. I think Messi being there now makes that difference. I think Messi being in Miami is just massive for the game over there, because he's not only is he there, he's scoring goals, he's playing well, he's doing it with a smile on his face. He looks like he's loving every minute of his time there. And that just transgresses into a different. It just is a real crossover player, Messi. Obviously, none of us could kind of vouch what Pele did in the '70s, but I'd imagine what Messi's doing now is probably bigger because social media and the reach and everything. So I think the game itself, and I do know I've had conversations with people that tell me that the big sports in the US are getting quite worried about the growth of soccer because it's safer than NFL. It's probably more accessible than the NBA. You don't have to be 7 foot tall to play it for a start, and baseball and ice hockey aren't really growing anymore. So soccer's an easy access sport, and the world's best players in the US. So I think a lot of things point towards the game growing and growing and growing. But I think what needs to happen now is that I think certainly the men's team. I know the women's team have got a bit of a crossroads coming because of what happened in Australia. But I think the men's team need to find a true global star, which is difficult. And I mean, this is taking it a different level. I think that everyone's asking what is Pep Guardiola's next job. Well, I don't know what it is, but for me, his next job will be go to the US, become their Johan Cruyff figure, totally rip it up and start again, become the guy that does to the US what he's done to Man City, encourage players to play a certain way, develop young talent. He's got a big enough name for people in the US that don't know football, soccer to embrace it. He could live in New York, he could live in Malibu, he could have a great time. So, and there's money. The money in the US is there. If somebody has the ambition to do it and the determination, I think Pep Guardiola could make the United States a real power in the world game. It'll take time, but I think that's what you need, because right now, I don't think the Greg Berhalter regime is the one that's going to make the game grow. He's just
not going to do it.
No, he's an organisation guy. He's not got any kind of pedigree outside the US. Think big, think outside the box, think the big. That's what the US does. Think the biggest possible, and that's Pep Guardiola.
I'll be real.
I'll just say that gave me chills because I've been dreaming of that as an opportunity. But I will say one of the biggest hurdles that we've had is I don't want to call it a hurdle, but it is an area that has been of discussion because Pep's name was getting thrown out there as well as Jose's and others. But the manager for the men have to be paid the same as the manager for the women. So at that same, with that same idea, it's like, okay, well, if the men do go get Pep, then the women need to then have to find someone of that equal caliber and pay. Yeah. And I think that's what some folks are saying is kind of like like they're being hamstrung by it a little bit.
I'd go higher than that. I'd put Pep at the top of the pyramid. So Pep above the manager of the men's and the women's team, the guy that gives you your philosophy and your leg and how you play, your weight, your DNA. That's the guy that rips.
Make him the sporting director or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, I love that. Okay.
Yeah, if Pep does truly come into the discussions, I will be interested to see what U.S. soccer does and how serious they are about progressing our name on the international stage. But probably a good segue to one of our second to last question here, Mark. When is the next time the USA will lift a World Cup trophy?
Oof. Well, I don't see the men doing it anytime soon, not in my lifetime, sadly. The women have got a real challenge, because I think that the way the women have won the World Cup in recent years as being big and powerful and strong doesn't really apply anymore, because Spain have ripped up the rule book. Spain aren't big, they're not powerful, they're not strong, but they're an amazing football team. And they won that World Cup with half of the best players not even there, and the other half not even liking the coach that was there, who's now gone. So you've got to think that Spain, how they dominated the men's game for a good period of time after winning the World Cup, that Spain have to be the blueprint going forward. And I'm not sure the US have the setup to play that way, So if the US are going to win the World Cup again, they're going to have to do it the way they've always done it, with a few kind of tweaks. So that's a difficult part of it. Are they able to do that? And I'm not sure. I mean, we don't even know the new coaches, do we? I do play Sandanovsky. I'm not sure, but I do think that Spain right now have reinvented the way that women's football has to be played, and the US have to find a way to cope with that. But one thing I will add as a caveat, we don't know who's going to host the next World Cup in 27 yet. So if that goes to the US, who are potential hosts, I think that makes it a lot more likely they might win it if they're at home. If it's a European World Cup, then no, I mean, it could be a generation before the US actually win it again.
Yeah, I think we'll find out in May 2024. So stay tuned.
Yeah, crazy. All right, last but not least, what is Footy Travel's hidden gem or diamond in the rough?
Well, in terms of which place to go to?
Yeah, I'd say whether it's the city or a stadium specifically. I know you mentioned San Siro, but maybe something that's even more buried, that's maybe less common, off the beaten path.
I'm going to give you
but still special.
Yeah, I'm going to give you two answers here and my answer will explain why. The first one is St. Petersburg, because it's such an amazing city, but nobody's going to St. Petersburg anytime soon. Sadly.
Yeah.
That is, but it is one of the world's great cities, and sadly, it's like I say, it's not on the list. But beyond that, in terms of hidden gems, I always found going to Bruges quite interesting. In Belgium.
I love Bruges.
It's
great answer. I haven't been to a match though.
It's like a fairy tale land, isn't it?
It is, yeah. The stadium's more kind of 1970s, austere kind of concrete bowl. It's not very nice, but the city itself is, it's like a little Venice. It's just beautiful. It's not that I've been to Venice, sadly, but just canals and just pretty little shops. But it's a great place. And again, I'll always say Cape Town. Cape Town is an amazing city, but that's not really a secret. That one is. That's not a hidden gem. That's just shining all the time.
Yeah. Diamond out in the open.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, again, this has been absolutely fantastic. Fellow Footy Travelers, listeners, thanks for joining us. We're here with Mark Ogden, senior writer with ESPN. Check out the show notes for some references to some of the articles we listed or talked about with Mark. And I'll just say, until we see you next time, Mark, it's been a pleasure. Safe travels to you. Can't wait to do this again sometime.
Cheers, guys.